In this video, we're going to take a look at the ISO performance of the Sony A7R V. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so here we are in Lightroom, and I have some landscape images that I shot with the Sony A7R V. These are all shot at different ISO values so that we can do some comparisons. But before we get into these landscape shots, I just want to get into some of these test chart images that I shot. This just kind of gives us a little bit more of a controlled scenario to examine the images. And by the way, these are all raw images. I haven't touched these at all, so these are all raw. And so let's go ahead and jump in. We'll just start doing some comparisons. So we'll start out with ISO 100, and we will compare that with ISO 200. So 100 on the left, 200 on the right. And I'm just gonna zoom in here, just kind of see if there's any noticeable difference here. And there's really not a huge difference. Maybe a slight bit of noise here in this kind of lighter color, but I am not seeing much difference at all between ISO 100 and ISO 200. Just maybe a slight bit of grain, but that's really about it. Alright, let's go ahead. We'll look at ISO 100 on the left versus ISO 400 now on the right. And just zoom in again. So now seeing a little bit more noise. So if you look at the whites here, you can notice a little bit more noise over here on the right, but it's fairly minimal, I would say. Not a huge difference. And we are zooming in at 100% here, so it's, you know, that way we can see if there really is a difference. You know, I'm seeing a little bit of noise in that color there. Even this dark blue, I can see a little bit. It's not super noticeable, but there is more noise there for sure. But yeah, ISO 400 is definitely still super usable. Let's go up to ISO 800 now. So we're comparing 100 versus 800. Just looking at these colors, you can see quite a bit more grain here. If you look over here at the kind of the white color here, side by side, you can definitely see a lot more grain over here on the right. Yeah, for sure, more grain down here. So let's go over to this side. Get these colors. You can see a lot more noise here in this red, this yellow, pretty much everything here. But this still seems pretty usable to me. It's not so much noise where, you know, I don't want to use an image like this, but it's starting to become more and more noticeable for sure. All right, let's look at ISO 1600 versus 100. And now we're seeing a much more noticeable difference here. Let's go over to this side. If you look at this red, you can just see so much more noise in here. Same thing with the yellow. I mean, all these colors, pretty much the whole image. Let's look at some of these lighter colors here. If you look at kind of this white area versus over here, it's definitely a pretty big difference at ISO 1600 here. Alright, let's go up to 3200. So again, 100 is on the left here, and then we got 3200 on the right. And just zoom in. And this is an even bigger difference for sure. Look at these lighter tones. How much noise is in here versus right here. Let's go down here. Oh yeah. Yeah, so this color right here for sure. Sure, there's a lot more noise in this kind of dark bluish color here. Definitely am seeing a lot more noise over here. Yeah. So I feel like the ISO 3200 is kind of getting to the point where I wouldn't want to use it, just because the noise is just a lot more noticeable. Now, is the image completely falling apart at ISO 3200? Not really, but it's definitely starting to get closer to that point. But let's go ahead now, look at ISO 6400. And we'll look over here, and yeah, it's quite a bit more noise for sure here. Look at these colors. Look at some of the noise in here. I mean, pretty much everywhere. All the grays, the whites. You can see it in these blacks. I mean, there's, yeah, the entire image is very, very grainy, very noisy here at ISO 6400. So this is kind of, yeah, I don't know if I'd want to really use the camera at that high of an ISO. But we will, we'll go continue on here. So now we're going to look at 12,800. Zoom right in, and it is pretty much a noisy mess now. If we compare, it's just super, super grainy, super noisy. Yeah, I'm not going to spend a ton of time there. And let's, we'll just, for completion's sake, we'll look at the rest of these. So now we're going to look at 25,600. And it looks really, really bad. Very, very bad. Everything is super, super noisy, super grainy. And then the max ISO is 32,000. And as expected, it looks like trash. I mean, it's just a noisy mess. Definitely wouldn't want to use it at that high of a ISO. Alright, so that kind of gives you an idea of the ISO performance, but let's go ahead and look at some more real world type example here. So this is ISO 100 versus 200 now. And let's go ahead and take a look. Not really a noticeable difference in those trees and the highlights, but I do see a little bit of grain in the shadow areas there. Let's look up here a little bit. And yeah, you know, there's a little bit of grain, but it's not terrible. Let's look at ISO 400. So we got 100 on the left, 400 on the right. Zoom in here. And yeah, it is definitely noisier. 400. You kind of look in this area here versus over here. You can definitely notice that grain. I'm not going to go through each single comparison again on this, but I do want to do a few. So let's go ahead, we'll look at ISO 100 versus 1600. And yeah, we see quite a bit of grain all throughout the image here, especially the shadows for sure. But yeah, looks like the entire image is noisy. Now you can't really tell a difference when you're looking at the image more globally here. Let me zoom out from 100%, we'll go to 50%. And you know, I can still see the noise here. This is ISO 1600 again. You can't really see it as much in the highlights, but shadows for sure. It's fairly noticeable even at 50% zoom. So let's go ahead and look at, I actually want to compare ISO 1600 versus 3200. I feel like on this camera, ISO 1600 and 3200, this is kind of where, at least for me, it starts to kind of reach that limit to where like I'm not really wanting to use it. So let's go ahead and compare these side by side though. So this is 1600 on the left, 3200 on the right, and let's take a look. 100%, and yeah, I mean, there's definitely more noise at ISO 3200 for sure. It's you know, again, this is 100% zoom, so it's going to be more noticeable. Let's look at it for 50%. And it's not as noticeable, but yeah, I mean, there's still more noise for sure in the ISO 3200. Yeah, okay, and then just for fun, let's go ahead and look at ISO 100 versus ISO 32,000. And I mean, even at a global level, this image over here looks like garbage. Let's zoom in though and take a look. Oh man, just straight up noise here. Yeah, this is not looking too good. But you know, that's such a high ISO. I don't know anybody that would ever shoot that high. But yeah, let's go ahead and look at this next shot here. So for this shot, we have another mountain, and this time we have a more blue sky. And what I noticed when I was looking at these images previously was the noise it's a lot easier to see the noise in the sky. Now I'm comparing ISO 100 versus 200 here, but if I just go to ISO 400 instead and zoom in at 100%. Let's see here. Yeah, you can see that grain difference between the 100 and 400 here. Very noticeable. But then the rest of the image, it is a lot harder to tell the difference. So, you know, I'd say ISO 400 is totally usable. Let's look at 800 here. Now I'm seeing a lot more grain compared to the 100, but I think this is still a usable image, you know, especially if you're gonna apply a little bit of a noise reduction and that kind of thing. You could totally salvage that. But let's go ahead and look at the sky again, where you can kind of notice a bigger difference in the noise, just because you have that kind of like single shade of blue basically in the sky, so it's a lot easier to see the noise. All right, and let's go ahead and look at 1600 versus 3200 for this shot. And let's zoom into the sky first at 100%. And yeah, I mean, there is a noticeable difference. Both are fairly noisy, but the ISO 3200, you know, it definitely has more noise for sure. And just kind of looking at this part of the image here, let's drag that over. So this part versus this part, now you can see more noise over here, definitely. And then let's look at these shadowy areas over here versus over here. So yeah, definitely more noise at ISO 3200. I mean, that's to be expected. But again, you know, I don't think I'd really want to go past this, but let's go ahead and we'll go past it. Let's look at 6400. We'll compare it to ISO 100. And you can just see that huge difference here. It just gets very noisy at 6400. I mean, you could probably still maybe salvage it with some, you know, if you have solid noise reduction technique and whatnot, but I would just rather choose not to shoot at that high of an ISO with this camera. But yeah, and then just for fun, we'll compare ISO 100 versus 32,000. And look at the sky here. Oh man, that just looks awful. I mean, I can't think of a reason why anybody would even want to shoot at that high. But maybe there is a reason. If there is, let me know, but I can't think of one. Alright, and then we have this other image here. And I'll just compare 100 versus 200 again. And, you know, just really not much of a noticeable difference here. Let's look down here and more in the shadow areas. Yeah, I mean, I can see maybe slight bit more grain, but it's not much. Yeah. This scene was pretty cool. You had the last bit of light was kind of hitting the top of the peak, and then we had some of that fog forming down there as well. But anyways, like I said, these are just raw files. I didn't edit these at all, but you know, maybe I'll edit some of these and see how they come out. Let's go ahead now and look at ISO 100 versus 400. And just kind of zoom in on this section. And man, yeah, there's not a huge difference. There's definitely a little bit more grain, but not, you know, it's totally, ISO 400 is definitely completely usable on this camera. Let's look up in the sky. Yeah, I can see a little bit more grain up here versus over here. All right, and then let's do a few more comparisons. Let's look at 100 versus 800 here. And yeah, I mean, it's definitely noisier, but I think ISO 800 is still definitely usable. Let's look up at the sky. Yeah, I mean, there's more grain. I think that can be cleaned up, but yeah, I don't know. 800's okay. 1600. So this is where I felt like it was starting to be a little bit too noisy for my taste. And again, that kind of holds true. It starts to get to that point where I'm like, yeah, but I think it is usable. If you apply some noise reduction, you know, and then if you're not zoomed in at 100%, you zoomed in at like 50%, like we are right here, it's definitely a lot harder to tell. And then if you're, you know, you're looking at it, you're looking at it more of a globally like this, it's definitely very hard to tell. But, and then let's go ahead, look at 100 versus 3200, and let's go back to 100%. This is 50% here, and there's definitely a lot more noise here. Let's go into 100%. You can see that noise even more clearly. Yeah, and then if we look at 6400, I know for sure this is kind of like, this is a no-no for me. This is not really where I want to shoot at all. So I think for me, like I was saying, I think the limit somewhere around 1600 to 3200, somewhere in there is about the highest I personally would want to go. I mean, you might have more tolerance for the noise than I do, you know, but anyways, let's go ahead and we'll do the comparison ISO 100 versus 32,000 just for fun. And oh yeah, super crazy noisy here. I mean, the color just falls apart, everything falls apart. Yeah, not looking too great there. But yeah, I hope that was helpful for you guys. It kind of gives you a sense of the ISO performance of the Sony A7R V. But anyways, that's it for now. I'll see you guys on the next video.